History tells the story of the world and of our lives. Sometimes that history goes bump in the night. Broadcasting from the center of Oddity and the supernatural in Central Florida, it's the History Goes Bump podcast.
Hello, you spooktacular people. Welcome to this 548th episode of the History Goes Bump podcast, Ghost Tours for the Theater of the Mind. I'm your host, Diane.
And this is Kelly.
Kelly, on this episode, we have part 2 and the final part to our Haunted Outer Banks series. We're going to be covering the Upper Islands.
Excellent.
Lots of haunted locations on this one. Before we get into that, we want to welcome into the spooktacular crew, Noelle with 2 L's and an E at the end there, Stacia, Samantha, Brandy with a Y, Becca, Lana, Wendy, Amanda, Bryn, and Melissa.
Thank you so much for joining our Facebook group.
And now, this moment in Oddity.
In Thorpeness, Suffolk, England, there's a structure that was built in 1923 to receive water pumped from the Thorpeness windmill. Its founder, Glencairn Stewart Ogilvie, designed it as a fantasy water tower in a fantasy village. What is unique about this structure is that it was turned into a residential home, which was incorporated to improve the look of the water tower. The mock Tudor and Jacobean-style structure incorporates a residential living space approximately 70 feet from the ground level. The water tower originally was able to hold 50,000 imperial gallons. However, during World War II, the tower was unintentionally hit by friendly gunfire from anti-aircraft guns. Once mended, the water tower saw a reduction in capacity down to 30,000 imperial gallons. By 1977, the main water tower was no longer needed to supply the village. It was then removed, allowing the house in the clouds to be fully transformed into a home. The residence boasts 5 bedrooms and 3 bathrooms with a total of 85 stair steps from top to bottom. The structure is very unique and has been featured in the media many times, but a several-story home built around a water tower certainly is odd.
Grab your slippers, hot chocolate, flashlight, and maybe even that baseball bat.
And now, this month in history.
In the month of July, on the 26th in 1945, the USS Indianapolis arrived at Tinian Island in the Mariana Islands with unassembled atomic bomb parts. The ship was sent on a high-speed voyage from San Francisco out into the western Pacific Ocean with no one on board knowing what the cargo consisted of. The voyage took 10 days and arrived at the island after the Manhattan Engineer District built special bomb assembly buildings, loading pits, and other facilities at the base. Already prepared was a 37-member team of scientists and specialists who were in charge of last-minute experiments and tests, thus resulting in the final assembly of the uranium bomb. Only 4 days after its delivery, the USS Indianapolis was sunk by a Japanese submarine with a loss of almost 900 lives. On July 30th, the target insert, projectile, and initiators were assembled in the bomb. On August 5th, after consultations with meteorologists to determine that weather predictions were favorable for a visual bombing, the mission was given the go-ahead. Consequently, on August 6, 1945, the bomber Enola Gay took flight and rose to 31,000 feet, deploying the bomb over Hiroshima at 8:15 a.m. Hundreds of thousands of Japanese died either from the initial blast or later from radiation poisoning, with the majority of deaths reported to be civilians. Nagasaki was later bombed on August 9th, leading to the surrender of Japan on August 15th, with Japan signing the Instrument of Surrender on September 2nd, 1945.
The Outer Banks are a vast ecosystem that have supported life for millions of years. Humans have been here for centuries. Key moments in American history are connected to the upper islands of the Outer Banks. from the disappearance of the Roanoke Colony to the Wright brothers' first flight. There are numerous haunted locations and legends in the Upper Islands. On this second episode of our Outer Banks series, we are going to explore the history and hauntings of the Upper Islands.
So last when we left you, we were on Hatteras Island. Just north of Hatteras Island is Body Island, with the Body Island Lighthouse. There are two stories behind the name of the island, and it is spelled B-O-D-I-E. So at first you and I were thinking it was Bodie, but it is said as Body. One is that a man with the last name Body, B-O-D-D-Y, had settled the area. A more interesting story claims that so many bodies washed up on the island from shipwrecks that it just made sense to call it Body Island. Body Island isn't really an island, as over the years it is connected to other Northern Barrier Islands to make a peninsula. The government decided to build a lighthouse here in 1837 because this area had lost more vessels than any other area along the Outer Banks. The lighthouse was completed in 1847, but because a man who had no experience in building lighthouses had been put in charge of construction, the lighthouse was leaning within 2 years. A second lighthouse was built in 1859, but it didn't last long either, as the Confederates thought the Union would take it over during the Civil War, and they blew it up.
Oh my.
Can you imagine blowing up your own lighthouse?
No.
The third and current lighthouse was built in 1871. A keeper's quarters duplex was built, and the first order Fresnel lens was lit on October 1st, 1872. Because the lighthouse was remote in those early days, the keeper's wife and children would stay on the mainland because they had no way to send them to school or anything like that, so they couldn't come over. The light was electrified in 1932, and the NPS took over its operation in 1953. The lighthouse is hard to miss at 156 feet and with its horizontal black and white stripes. The lighthouse itself is not haunted, but the keeper's cottage has some stories. People claim to hear knocking coming from the other side of the bricked-in fireplace. This usually happens around 4 p.m. There are also stories that a young female ghost haunts the area, possibly one of the bodies that washed up here. She is seen in period clothing and likes to follow visitors around, occasionally showing up in photos. She didn't show up in any of our photos.
Sadly, no.
No.
Many indigenous tribes called the Outer Banks home. These were the Secatan, Puttaskeet, and Chowanoke. They would head out to the eastern banks in the summer for fishing and then move back inland to places like Roanoke Island and the mainland during winter. Early relationships between the indigenous people and European explorers were good. In 1584, the English attempted to colonize Roanoke for the first time. Roanoke Island is across from Body Island. Governor Ralph Lane founded Roanoke Colony, and it wasn't long before they needed more supplies. Sir Richard Grenville was bringing a resupply, and he was delayed, so Lane threw in the towel and headed back to England. Grenville finally made it to the colony 2 weeks later, and he left the supplies and a small detachment of men.
The second attempt to colonize Roanoke came in 1587, led by John Wright. The original plan by Sir Walter Raleigh was to set up the city of Raleigh in Chesapeake Bay. Grenville's men had become pretty desperate by this time because they needed supplies, so when White showed up to check in on them, they forced White to stay there, and Roanoke Colony was reestablished.
Well then. Okay.
Drop anchor, drop the stuff, you're staying here. White needed to get supplies, so he promised to be back in 1588, but White wouldn't return until 1590 because of the Anglo-Spanish War. He found the settlement still there, and it had clearly been fortified, but all of the settlers were missing. The only clue left as to where they had gone was the word Croatoan carved into the stake wall, and that's basically the fort wall. White assumed that this meant they had gone to Croatoan Island. He couldn't investigate that theory because of rough seas, and he headed back to England. His granddaughter was born at Roanoke Colony and was the first English person born in this new world. Her name was Virginia Dare, and the county where Roanoke Island is located is named for her, Dare County. We still don't know what happened to the 115 colonists that disappeared. Have you ever had any theories about that?
Not particularly.
I actually think that they were in really dire straits and the Native Americans came and helped them. And so they did go off and live with the different tribes there, probably the Croatoan, and just intermingled and had children with them. And there you go.
Yeah, I mean, that's my assumption as well.
Yeah.
Manteo is the main city on Roanoke Island. They do offer a ghost tour here, but it wasn't available the night we were in the area.
If you can believe it, Kelly, they don't do them on the weekends.
I know, I thought that was the strangest thing, but...
Yeah, I think it was like Wednesdays and Thursdays or something. Or maybe it was Tuesdays and Thursdays or something.
I think it was like Tuesdays
or
and
Mondays
Thursdays.
and Wednesdays. I was like, what?
Very odd.
No
but
Fridays or weekends?
It is what it is. And there's good reason for the tour because several locations here are haunted. Manteo was incorporated in 1899 and was a bustling trade center. In the mid-1980s, the town was renovated for a 400th anniversary party, and Princess Anne came to dedicate the Elizabeth II, a representative 16th century sailing ship like what the colonists would have used to come to the island. There are several hotels on the island, and a few of them are reputedly haunted. The first is Roanoke Island Inn. The inn overlooks the harbor of Shallow Bag Bay and has over 1.5 acres of gardens. Asa Warren Jones built the inn as his home in the 1860s. It eventually became a boarding house in the early 1900s. Through the generations, the same family continued to own the house, and each would expand the house. The post office for Manteo was once housed in the inn, and one of the postmasters there was named Roscoe Jones. The Roanoke Inn opened in 1990 with 8 rooms under John Wilson and Billy Parker. Lauren and Jason Borland bought the inn in 2017.
And that is who owns it right now. The spirit at the inn is thought to be Roscoe. He was laid off from the post office and he was absolutely devastated. He begged to keep his job to no avail. He walked home, smelled the roses growing near the front porch one last time, walked up the stairs to his bedroom and locked himself in. Now, I thought the next line was going to be, and unfortunately he committed suicide.
Out, yeah.
No, he just never left the room again. And his wife took to leaving a meal for him on the table, and he would come down when everyone had gone to bed to get the plate of food. So he just never talked to anybody again. Roscoe passed away a few years later, never having spoken to his family again. He was just that embarrassed about losing his job, I guess.
Wow.
Neighbors started claiming to see Roscoe leaving the inn in his postal uniform. The apparition would disappear when it reached the post office. Some people would see the apparition return to the inn as well. 2 of the rooms that had previously been Roscoe's rooms have had prankster activity. One couple reported that their jewelry had been played with. Boxes and other items have been thrown around on the 3rd floor, and screams and disembodied footsteps have been heard coming from that floor as well.
The Tranquil House Inn has a great view of the Roanoke Island Festival Park and sits on the historic waterfront. The inn has a Nantucket styling to it with custom cypress woodwork and stained glass. Donnie Just and his father Don had owned the inn since 1993, and then Mike and Holly Harrington purchased the property in 2020. Mike had proposed to Holly there in 2005.
So clearly it had a special spot in their hearts.
Clearly. The inn had originally been located across the street, but a fire in the 1930s destroyed it, so it was rebuilt here. The desk manager had been Carolyn, and she told Peggy Schmidt, who wrote Ghosts of the Outer Banks, that the first floor had the most activity. One morning, a guest staying on the first floor approached Carolyn when she was alone and asked her if anything strange had been reported in her room before. Carolyn didn't get a chance to respond before the guest told her that she had seen a female apparition that very morning. She awakened to see the ghost standing by her bedside. This spirit was in period clothing, and every time the guest tried to get up, the spirit would push her gently back down. The guest got really annoyed and yelled, "Stop!" and the spirit disappeared. Carolyn said that other guests reported disembodied whispers in that room. Other rooms had had their televisions turning on their own. They checked wiring and found no issues, so they bought all new TVs. That didn't solve the problem. Another time, a couple approached Carolyn and told her there was a ghost in their room. She asked how they knew, and the man said that the night before he went to the bathroom and he made sure to put the toilet seat down. His wife had trained him properly. He was the first person in the bathroom the next morning, and he found the toilet seat up. As he looked at the seat, he watched it slam back down.
Yeah, so I mean, it could be by chance. Maybe he forgot that he'd left it up, and then maybe something rattled the hotel and then the seat fell. But it is interesting that he specified that he always put the toilet seat down. So he was like, I've been trained. I don't leave it up anymore. We did this trip with Jared, and of course he doesn't live with women anymore. So
you almost got your tushy dunked.
Yeah, there were a few times that I was like, Jared, you are traveling with 2 women. You need to put the toilet seat down. The charming Victorian White Doe Inn was opened near the turn of the century and is named for the legend about Virginia Dare and the white doe. It is said that Virginia grew into a beautiful woman with fair skin, blonde hair, and gray eyes. She caught the eye of 2 Native American men in the tribe that had rescued her and her mother from the Roanoke Colony. One was a warrior and the other a medicine man. Virginia fell in love with the warrior, and the heartbroken medicine man used his magic to turn Virginia into a white doe. The only way to snap her out of the spell would be to hit her with a magic arrow. Warriors would hunt for the white doe, but it was elusive. One day, the medicine man decided he needed to find the white doe because he was afraid she would be killed. He wasn't aware that the warrior who was his competitor in love was hunting the white doe too. The medicine man found the white doe and he fired his arrow. At the same time, the warrior had found the doe and fired his arrow as well. The medicine man's arrow turned the white doe back into Virginia, and the warrior's arrow hit and killed her after that. Now it is said that her spirit still haunts the island as a white doe, and the white doe speaks with a woman's voice.
Okay, so that is a legend, but the haunts at the White Doe Inn seem very real. The Meekins family had lived in the Outer Banks since before the American Revolution. Theodore Meekins came to Manteo from Rodanthe on Hatteras Island. He married Rosa P. Midget in 1896, and the couple had 7 children. They purchased a lot in 1904 and built a house with the help of Theodore's brother-in-law, John Wilson, and local carpenter Joe Daly. They built the 3-story Queen Anne-style house in Manteo using a photograph that Rosa had found of a house she liked. The home had 17 rooms when completed. This is the largest house on Roanoke Island. Meekins became a magistrate and also served in the North Carolina State Legislature from 1945 to 1947. Meekins also built the Chickamauga life-saving station near Rodanthe. This is one of the most famous life-saving outposts in the history of the U.S. Coast Guard. Meekins died in 1952, and his son Theodore Jr. inherited the house, which passed on to his wife Goldie when he died in 1959. Everyone called her Miss Goldie. Eventually, the house was too much for Goldie, and she sold it in 1993 to David and Tanya Roberts, who turned it into a bed and breakfast. The current innkeepers of the inn are Bob and Bebe Woody. There are 9 rooms, and a gourmet breakfast is served in the mornings. Both employees and guests have had strange experiences at the White Doe Inn. Lights and electronics turn on and off by themselves. A small door behind the staircase opens and closes on its own. Guests will hear it periodically at night and go check about the sound. They won't find anything but the closed door. But when they walk away, it opens again slowly.
There's a haunted theater in Manteo, too. The Pioneer Theater was built in 1918 by the Creef family, and they owned it until 2023 when they closed the theater. It was purchased in February of that year by the Bass Knight and Hatchell families, and they retained the name and paid homage to the Creef family. The theater hosts movies, music, theater, and events. There are rumors that members of the Creef family haunt the old movie theater. People in the theater have had their cell phones knocked out of their hands, so it's kind of like they're like, shut those off. And if people
be
aren't shutting them
respectful
off,
during the performance.
boom. So what we did basically is we came in off of Body Island, and you go into Roanoke Island, and then you can come back out and then continue up the Outer Banks. So Roanoke Island is not like in that Outer Banks area. It's kind of in between that and the mainland. So we're back on the road and off Roanoke Island to the Outer Banks Islands, and this brings us to Nag's Head. This village was founded in the 1830s as a tourist colony. Francis Nixon brought his family here shortly before that, looking to avoid malaria in the area where they'd been living. He encouraged other friends to visit as well. The huts where the fishermen and ship salvagers lived on Nag's Head were soon replaced by beach cottages. So before the tourists came, you had people who were living here, like doing some work with fishing and grabbing ships and stuff. The bankers weren't upset about this development as it brought a new form of income. They sold vegetables and seafood and took people on tours aboard horse-drawn carts. Hotels were built in 1838. A boardwalk was built in 1850 to the beach, and there was a pavilion where music was played and a bowling alley was built. During the Civil War, the Union marched in and commandeered hotels to use as headquarters. The city was incorporated in 1923, and hurricanes hit in 1899 and 1933, and World War II brought danger near to the shore. One story on how it got the name Nag's Head claims that nags was the ponies there, so they called their ponies nags.
Aw,
I've never heard
that's
horses
kind of
called that before, but
Oh, I have, but it's kind of insulting.
oh.
Like an old nag. Go get that old nag.
And you had these ship salvagers who were there, and they would put lamps on the heads of their nags to get ships to crash into the shoals.
Oh, my word.
So then they could raid them for all the
Oh,
supplies
good
that
grief.
were on them. So that's how you'd get, Nag's head. The real story's probably that some shipwrecked sailors named it after a place they had come from in Europe when they came to colonize and such.
Gotcha.
And now a little break for a word about one of our sponsors.
The Oasis Suites Hotel is located at 7721 South Virginia Dare Trail. This originally was a waterfront restaurant that was also named Oasis. Violet Kellum was the woman who opened that restaurant in 1950, and she had an ingenious plan for getting people to flock to the restaurant. This was perhaps the 1950s version of Hooters. The waitresses wore white Bermuda shorts and shirts, blue ties and aprons, and no shoes. The servers were provided on-site housing. The specialty at the restaurant was lace cornbread, which was like a crunchy hush puppy served with lots of butter. The Oasis closed in 1980 and was reopened as The Dock by Warren Jones. In 1990, Violet's grandchildren bought the restaurant and renovated it and opened it as the Oasis once again. The Hatchell family bought it in 2003, but the restaurant burned to the ground in 2004, and that was it for the original restaurant. The Hatchells decided to rebuild, but this time they would open a hotel. This is a boutique hotel of suites with kitchens and ghosts.
When the restaurant was still open, a group of 4 fishermen approached the building late one fall evening thinking that the restaurant was still serving because they saw lights on, but the doors were locked. When they looked in the windows, they saw a black tails and tie party going on. It was strange because there were no cars parked outside. The men peered in again, and suddenly the party was gone. No one was inside. Another ghost that haunted the restaurant was an old sea captain with a long, wiry beard and a blue sailor's cap and long blue coat with 3 big black buttons. His full-bodied apparition was seen occasionally running in slow motion from the grill to the freezer. Other times he just stood staring.
Running in slow motion? That's really bizarre.
Yeah, to me, that seems like it has to be some kind of a residual, and I don't know, maybe when you get caught in a time loop, that's what happens to you. You slow down.
Weird. I don't believe I've ever heard of anything like that.
No.
There was also the spirit of a monk that had the total monk hair and robe that appeared once to the restaurant manager named Ron. Seems he was just passing through. And then there was this female ghost with red hair and blue eyes in a pink 1950s style dress. She liked to appear and scare the staff. Ron also claimed that a spirit may have saved his life. This was in March of 2004 when a fire erupted that destroyed the building. A flammable liquid was used for renovating the floors near the grill, and it caught fire. Ron got everybody out except for one person. When he realized someone was still inside, he ran inside and immediately heard a very loud male voice say, "You have 3 seconds to get out." Ron ran out and saw with relief that the employee was outside. Then the building became entirely engulfed.
And everybody really misses it. Real bummer that it was lost. Nag's Head Woods is supposed to be haunted as well. In the woods, there's a small yellow hunting cabin that people claim had been the home of the Goat Man. He obtained that name because he raised goats. One night, some local teens decided to antagonize him, but they didn't find him at home, so they killed his goats. I mean, how do you go from, we're going to antagonize somebody to let's kill your animals?
Sure.
The man sought revenge and chased down the teens with an axe, which he threw. He missed them all. It's said that through the years, he took on the look of a goat. He was a half man and half goat. Legends claim that he chases people at night through the woods. There's not just a goat man in this 640 acres of wetlands, but also a witch. Peggy Schmidt, who we mentioned earlier, wrote Ghosts of the Outer Banks, conveys the story on page 21. The story goes that the witch had one child, a boy. Since her husband had long disappeared, courtesy of the pirates that roamed the swamp, all her loving attention was focused on her only child. As he grew older, she dreamed of the day when he would marry and she would become a grandmother. For years, the witch had a wonderful relationship with the local fishermen. When they had extra catch, they would stop by and give her some. Sometimes they would take her son out with them, and anything that he caught, he was allowed to keep. For their kindness, she would cast a spell on their boats in order to keep them safe. It was a mutual relationship built on respect and caring. Then one day, the pirates appeared at her door again. She begged and pleaded for them to leave her beloved son alone, but her pleas fell on deaf ears. The pirates forced her son into service aboard a ship, where he eventually lost his life in a battle at sea. When the pirates returned to Nag's Head Woods, they ventured to the witch's home to tell her the sad news. Knowing her reputation as a witch, the pirates believed that if they paid her a hefty portion of their booty, she would be satisfied. Although she took the booty, nothing would ever replace her son, so she also placed a curse on the head of the captain of the ship. She swore that he too would never feel the joy of becoming a grandparent and that he would never have a grandson to carry on his name. Showing fear in front of one's crew was a sure way for a mutiny to happen, so the captain scoffed at the witch's curse, but secretly he became a little nervous because he did have a wife and one child, a daughter. They lived safely in a home overlooking the Chowan River. When he returned home, he decided to share the tale of the witch, her son, and the curse with his wife. Well, even the wives of pirates have a breaking point. Empathizing with the witch, she took their child, half the pirates' fortune, and moved back to her hometown of Charlestown, South Carolina. She never saw her husband again. Several years later, she learned he had died of yellow fever and was buried at sea. Now that her husband was gone, his wife decided to move back to her original home and enjoy the remainder of his fortunes there. This is where her daughter grew into a beautiful woman and met the man she was to marry. The wedding was to take place on New Year's Eve. When the day finally arrived, friends and family came from miles away to take part in the happy occasion. The room was filled with flowers, and as the crowd stood for the bride's entry to the wedding march, she was nowhere to be found. The music started again, and the hairs on the back of the mother's neck rose. She remembered the curse of the witch of Nag's Head Woods. But then she heard her daughter's voice on the stairway above. She heaved a great sigh. Her daughter, always a feisty sprite and a bit of a practical joker, called down to the assembled group. She teased her groom that if he wanted to marry her, he had to come up and catch her. While it annoyed her that her daughter was acting like a fool at her wedding, her mother was greatly relieved that she was okay. That is, until they couldn't find her again. This time it was permanent. They looked everywhere for her, but it seemed like she'd just disappeared into thin air. A search party was organized and combed through the house for hours looking for her. Finally, the guests left and the bride still was not found. The hunt for her stretched into days, weeks, and months. Finally, staying in the house was too much for the mother. She boarded the house up and never returned to it again. Her daughter never was found, and the witch's curse had come to fruition. The pirate's line had died. The next year, exactly 1 year to the day of the daughter's disappearance, a group of children were walking by the house on the way to a New Year's Eve party. There in the windows, they could see the ghost of a young woman moving about from window to window. She then called to the children and gestured with her hands to come inside and join her. Needless to say, the children were terrified and ran home to share this unearthly discovery with their parents. Year after year, and only on New Year's Eve, the same ghostly face appeared in the windows. The legend grew as more and more people came to see if the stories were true. Some brave souls tried to solve the mystery and talk to the ghost, but as soon as someone came into the house, the ghost disappeared. Finally, one man decided to put an end to the mystery. He decided that he would stay in the house overnight in order to make contact with the ghost. He waited patiently throughout the night for the ghost to appear, but finally sleep got the best of him. He slept fitfully, and close to midnight he had a frightening dream. He was standing on a stairwell watching a wedding ceremony. The pretty young bride decided to run down the hallway calling to her husband-to-be. As she ran, she tripped and reached to steady herself on the closest wall. When she did this, she accidentally touched a secret lever that opened a trap door right beneath her feet. She plunged into a room below the floor and the trap door slammed shut. She basically was buried alive. This dream was so real and so horrible that the man was jolted awake. When he was fully awake, he heard it. A cackle only a witch could make filled the room. Okay, it was just a dream, he told himself, but something about the vividness of the dream made him believe it. He had to go see for himself. As he walked the hallways, he found an area similar to what he'd seen in the dream. He reached along the wall, and there it was, the lever. After squeezing himself as close to the wall as possible, he pulled it. He heard grinding and clanking, and sure enough, a room appeared. At the bottom of the room was a skeleton of a woman with the remains of a veil attached to her head. The pirate's daughter had finally been found. Once her body was recovered and given a proper burial, the ghost was never seen again. Pretty cool legend, huh?
It is.
There's also a woman who was walking her dog and saw a man approaching her. Her dog got his hackles up and started barking, which immediately put her on guard. The man continued to come towards her, and then she noticed he was wearing an old sea captain's uniform, and then he disappeared. These sea captains like to show up a lot.
Sure do. The Eagles Airy Club, FOE 4506, is located at 2706 Croatoan Highway. They moved into the building in November of 2017. Before the Eagles obtained the property, this was a variety of restaurants. There had been Firefly Restaurant, Almost 11 Restaurant, and Mykonos Restaurant and Bar. Staff at the restaurants reported wine glasses flying off counters and some wine bottles doing the same. Shadow figures were also seen, and the bathrooms would sometimes lock themselves.
We arrived in Kill Devil Hills next, and even though we're always taught that the Wright brothers conducted their flying experiments in Kitty Hawk, well, Kelly, what did we find?
It's actually Kill Devil Hills.
Yep, that's where the National Memorial is located. This is where most of the people in the Outer Banks actually live. This is the most populous city here. It's very commercial here, so if you're looking for a peaceful beach vacation, this might not be the area for you. The town was founded on the site of Orville and Wilbur's first controlled powered airplane flight, which happened on December 17th, 1903. The breezes coming in off the Atlantic were perfect, and there was a big sand hill for them to fly the airplane off from. And you can imagine if you're going to be falling down, and
Yes.
it's nicer to fall into sand than other things. After each test, they'd have to hike up the sand with the plane. Locals helped them carry the planes. They eventually planted the grass to make it easier. So it didn't really soften their fall as much, but they were like, this is too much trying to climb up these sand hills.
Yeah, it was said that for every step up carrying the plane, they would slide back like another step too.
Yeah.
So
There was no town here, so the brothers built simple wooden buildings to use as workshops and living quarters. The Wright Brothers National Memorial was dedicated in 1932. Kill Devil Hills got its municipal charter in 1953, and there are a few legends about how it got its unique name. One claims that cargo ships carrying rum would sometimes wreck along the coast, and the rum cargo would wash up ashore on the sandhills, and locals who found the rum said it was strong enough to, quote, kill the devil. The more interesting story claims a man tried to extort money from the devil, and he trapped him in a pit at the top of the hill that the Wright brothers had built. A huge granite pylon sits in the spot today as part of the memorial. So we went in there and looked at the quotes on the wall and had no idea that the devil's underneath there. Gosh, Kelly. Maybe that's why we had all those Black Hawk helicopters. There were like 3 of them that went past right when we were standing at the very top of the monument. It was so cool.
it was perfect timing, that's for sure.
We have that video up on our Instagram. As far as we know, there's not any ghosts at the Wright Brothers Memorial.
After we visited the memorial, we headed the 4 miles up to Kitty Hawk to the Black Pelican restaurant to have lunch. Kitty Hawk was named for the Algonquin Chickahawk, which means a place to hunt geese. We picked it because we read it was haunted. This is a large restaurant tucked right behind the sand dunes leading out to the beach. During the late 1800s, this was one of 7 life-saving stations along the Outer Banks, Old Station 6. The station keeper here was named James Hobbs, and he didn't get along with one of the surfmen in his charge named T.L. Daniels. No one knows if there's an animosity here because Daniels disrespected Hobbs' wife, or if Daniels was just generally unruly. But Daniels ended up dead from a gunshot wound. His body was found on the floor near where the front desk of the restaurant lobby sits today. There were no police to report the crime to, and nobody at the station liked the guy. So a decision was made to bury the body at sea and clean up the station, and that's what the crew did. And Hobbs never faced any punishment, and that might be why Daniel's spirit is still here. Disembodied footsteps are heard, and doors have closed all on their own. People sometimes see blood on the wall. This is the kind of thing that keeps reappearing and then disappearing. Some staff have reported seeing the ghosts of Daniels. Male bartenders claimed that they got pushed by something they couldn't see. Unfortunately, our server was new, and she hadn't had any experiences yet.
Yeah, we were all coy about, let's ask her if she's had any experiences.
She didn't seem real happy about us asking that.
Well, I just started, so I don't know, but now I'm going to ask people, I wonder. Currituck was named by the Native Americans who fished and hunted here. The name means land of the wild goose, which was fitting because there was an abundance of geese here during migration. The name carried over from the Sound and the county where the town of Corolla is located. This is spelled like Corolla, like I have a Toyota Corolla, that's how I would have said it, but it's actually locally it said Corolla. A herd of feral banker horses call this home. The town had originally been named Jones Hill after an early settler, which was later changed to Whalehead. A post office was established in 1895, and the name was changed to Corolla at the time after the petals of a flower. Development really didn't happen until the 1960s with a big burst in the 1980s. Corolla features the Currituck Lighthouse, which is the 4th and final lighthouse in the Outer Banks, and the only one that we didn't visit.
I know.
We didn't go that far north. The lighthouse rises 162 feet and was built from red brick that was left unpainted. It opened in December of 1875 and became automated in 1939. The lighthouse still has its original Fresnel first-order lens. This lens replaced an incandescent oil vapor lamp that replaced a Funk's hydraulic float lamp that was fueled with lard oil. A system of weights rotated the huge lens until electricity came to the lighthouse. A keeper would have to crank the weights by hand every 2.5 hours. They said it was kind of set up like a grandfather clock.
Oh, interesting.
Visitors are allowed to climb its 220 steps, and the Outer Banks conservationists own it. The lighthouse keeper's house is still here, and it's reputedly the north room that is haunted. One of the lighthouse keeper's daughters died while playing on the beach. Apparently she drowned. The north room had been her room, and people think somehow it ended up cursed. A friend came to stay at the house and slept in that room and contracted an illness that she eventually died from. A wife of a lighthouse keeper came down with TB, and she quarantined in that room until she died. Now people who go into the room say they get an uneasy feeling, and some even become physically ill. Disembodied voices are heard in the room sometimes, and sheets have occasionally been tugged.
The Whalehead Club is located at 1100 Club Road and was built in 1922 by Edward Collins Knight Jr., who was a conservationist and waterfowl hunter. The hunting lodge was built in the Art Nouveau style. During World War II, it was used as a training base for the U.S. Coast Guard. This brought hundreds of sailors to Kerala, and they built support buildings and barracks. The next iteration was a boys' correctional school, and then it was a rocket fuel testing site. In the 1990s, the building was restored to its original condition and is open to visitors. The 21,000 square foot building is open for historic tours and ghost tours. The smell of cigar smoke has been detected, especially near the portrait of Edward Knight. The first story of this occurrence was in the 1960s, when families of the corporation testing the rocket fuel were staying there. A daughter went to her parents' room and she said she smelled smoke. They searched the house, and when they got to the dining room, they saw smoke coming out of the portrait of Mr. Knight. It was as though the cigar he held in the picture was real. There's the ghost of a young girl here who once tried to grab another young child down in the basement. When an adult went to see who was in the basement, there was no one there. A staff member once heard disembodied footsteps coming up behind them on the basement stairs. The basement is said to be the most haunted area. A visitor claimed that something grabbed his leg when he was walking on the second floor alone. Pots and pans have banged themselves together in the kitchen. Doors open and close on their own. One of the reasons it might be haunted here is because dead bodies from shipwrecks were brought inside to get them off the beach.
And finally, there's the legend about the portrait of Theodosia Burr. Theodosia was the only child of Aaron Burr. Aaron Burr was a founding father and the third vice president of the United States, serving under Thomas Jefferson. He'd been a lawyer and served as an officer during the American Revolution. Burr is probably most famous for having a duel with Alexander Hamilton, in which he mortally wounded Hamilton in 1804. His daughter Theodosia was born in 1783 and was named after her mother. The Burrs would have 3 other children, but 2 were stillborn and 1 died at age 3. Burr and his daughter were very close, and he made sure she had a good education. He considered her to be a confidant. She married Joseph Alston in 1801, and they had 1 son who died in 1811. Theodosia was aboard a schooner named Patriot that was sailing off the Carolinas in 1812 when it was either hit by pirates or became shipwrecked. Apparently, she was on her way to New York to visit her father. What happened to Theodosia is an ongoing mystery, and this was added to by the discovery of a portrait on the Outer Banks 50 years after Theodosia disappeared. In 1869, Dr. William Poole was visiting Nag's Head when he was given a portrait of a young woman as payment for his services. No one knew the woman, but the doctor knew the portrait was valuable. The fisherman who gave him the portrait said that a young woman had drifted ashore near Nag's Head and that she didn't know who she was, and all she had with her was the portrait. The fisherman had cared for her, and he asked her to be his wife. The portrait hung in their cottage. The doctor had helped the fisherman's wife, and when the doctor tried to take the portrait, the elderly wife jumped from the bed howling that the portrait was hers, and then she ran into the ocean. The portrait washed up on the shore the next day. Dr. Poole took the picture home with him, and it hangs today in the Lewis Walpole Library. The portrait is known as the Nag's Head portrait of Theodosia Burr. And then Peggy Schmidt adds a twist to this. Little did we know that this picture would turn our fascinating legend into a reality. In 2009, Ghost Tours booked a private tour on a beautiful July evening. This large family group chatted with our guide and enjoyed all the stories. They settled comfortably in the chairs in the town's gazebo and began listening to the tale of Theodosia. As the guide continued, he noticed that they were smiling and exchanging little glances, but those smiles quickly vanished when the picture of Theodosia was produced. As the picture was passed around, the group began holding it up and comparing it to the young ladies in the group. Finally, our guide had to ask, "What's going on?" The eldest family member finally confessed, "We're the Burr family. We have often heard this story and just assumed it was an old tale. But if you look at this picture and then look at us, you can tell that we are really related." Maybe it's not a legend after all. Later that summer in the same gazebo, Theodosia's picture was shown again. This time 2 young men paled at the sight. As soon as the guide finished, they had to share their news with the group. "We saw this woman on the beach this morning. She was walking on the beach near the surf line in Nag's Head. She was wearing that same outfit that she has on in the picture. We thought she was just a crazy woman in a funny pair of pajamas. She didn't say anything, but just kept muttering to herself. After we passed her, we turned around to see where she was going. She just disappeared into thin air." And apparently, Theodosia still likes to take walks on that beach.
Apparently.
But isn't that fascinating? This picture is a real thing, and it really hangs somewhere, and really supposedly came from the Outer Banks, and they can't explain it.
Yeah.
And nobody knows whatever happened to Theodosia Burr. It's still a mystery to this day. But it looks to me like she died out there somewhere at some point.
Kind of like
around.
the Roanokers.
Exactly.
The entire Outer Banks is a fun, relaxing, and beautiful place full of history and what seems to be a lot of haunts. Are any of these locations in the upper islands of the Outer Banks haunted?
That is for you to decide. It was a lot of fun. I'm glad that I've been to the Outer Banks once before, so it was neat to get to see it a second time and share it with you and Jared.
It was a great trip.
So if you guys have not been to the Outer Banks, we encourage you to do that. We also encourage you to check out our website at historygoesbump.com. And if you'd like to send us some feedback, you can do that at historygoesbump@gmail.com. And you can make comments on any of our social media or over on our website. We heard from Heather over there. "Hi, Diane and Kelly. I've listened for a while, started at the beginning, and I'm almost caught up. I just listened to the McMenamins Edgefield Redux. A lot of the stories mention the paintings, which are creepy, intentionally surrealistic. I popped over to the website to look at photos, and today happens to be Edgefield's 113th birthday celebration. Synchronicity." That's just amazing. She's like, "Oh, I'm going to go over there and check this out since I listened to this," and bam, they're having their birthday. And it's got 13 in it, 113th. You've also recently talked about Rimsky-Korsakoffy House, where the furniture does strange things. I've never heard of this being meant to indicate ghosts. More as a measurement of whether you've had enough for the night.
Oh, well then.
And we got another synchronicity. This is from Kelly, same name as you.
And she spells it correctly.
Yes, she posted it in the crew. "Hey, Spooktacular people, I was listening to the latest episode about Winnipeg's Hamilton House, and you were talking about the synchronicity with the Titanic. You mentioned this video of a street musician and the dude and his daughter walking by, which he had said, hey, that guy looks like a rock star. Well, that dude, or rock star, happens to be my cousin. His name is Dominic Allen Capaldi, and he is a musician in New York City. He did a tour with the band Foreigner in the early 2000s. His daughter's Kaylee. She's a very talented young singer. We come from a long line of entertainers going back to Scotland. Just thought I'd give you my bit of synchronization. Have a spooky day, everyone."
I love that. And it boom, boom, boom with the Titanic stuff.
And on her post, she put in the comment, she went and found the video and posted it so people could watch it.
Right.
So we rewatched it, and I couldn't remember if the girl was in Titanic or if the family had gone to go see it. She actually was starring in it as the Celine Dion character.
Which is so amazing.
Yeah,
I love it.
So cool.
And it was the full video, which was great because we got to watch the entire thing, whereas what we saw previously was just a little snippet.
And since we're going with the theme of synchronicity, isn't it weird that all 3 of the messages that we've gotten here are on synchronicity? Here's the last one. This is from Emily. "Hi, HGB. I wanted to tell you about some strange synchronicity that recently happened and all started with your show. I'd heard several advertisements for the podcast Victoria's Lift while listening to History Goes Bump. I started listening to it last week, and episode 2 heavily features Nikola Tesla. No spoilers. I apparently listened to this episode the day before Tesla's birthday. He was born June 10th, 1856, and that random fact popped up on Google. And because things come in threes, our synchronicity came in threes too. I work at a veterinary clinic, and that same day I was looking at our upcoming appointments. The next day, June 11th, sure enough, we were seeing a dog named Tesla. Maybe the universe is saying that I need to invest in Tesla.
Perhaps.
And then she said she highly recommends Victoria's Lift, which of course we know all about because we even have a couple of sound bites from Victoria herself. So I just let her know, we love that synchronicity, and now it's happened to you. We love Victoria's Lift. Dan, who created it, is a good friend of mine. He even joined us for the Christmas special in 2015 and a Halloween roundtable we did years ago. And we actually support the show over on Patreon too. And then I let her know that I actually wrote a couple of the episodes. So I'm like, if you like it, you're going to hear me on there too. I wrote Restitution and Redemption. One in season 1 and one in season 2. Thank you so much for sharing those little bits of synchronicity, everybody. We want to thank you all for joining us for this episode. I've been your host, Diane.
And this has been Kelly.
You take care now.
Bye-bye.
This episode is brought to you by our executive producers.
Dispatches from the Grave Digger.
We want to welcome into the cemetery Amy Boardman. We're going to be burying you in a chest tomb.
Thank you so much for supporting History Goes Bump.
Want to keep the spooks away? Give us a review.
Daytime, nighttime. Want to play daytime, nighttime with me?
Kill Devil Hills got its municipal charter.
Turtle. It's a turtle.
It's a turtle.